Hello and welcome to the podcast Druga Strana. My name is Jelena Nikolic and I'm a master psychologist in the area of clinical psychology and psychotherapy and a PhD student at the University of Southern Denmark. Our guest today is Tia Lancaster, a creator of a value-based training called Reevaluate 180. Okay, let's go to Tia and let's find out what is this model all about and how it can benefit us. Hello, Tia, and welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your life, about yourself, and something about your work? So, what is the goal of the R180, and how it can really benefit people?
Hello, Jelena. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yes.
We've been trying to get this group together for a little while now, so I'm excited to be
Yes.
here. Evaluate 180 is really about the prioritization of personal values and how do I figure out why I'm not practicing my values and what's blocking me from practicing my values. And then once I figure out some of those things, how do I get there? How do I live a better life? How do I live a happier life and match my behaviors and actions to actually those core beliefs, those things that underpin all of us. I mean, values underpin everything, our actions, our thoughts, our words. It's our internal compass. I mean, it's always the most beautiful question I should say when I speak with people is even after they've gone through the training, I often ask them, can you please define personal values for me? And it's really, it seems like an easy question, but it's not, you know?
Actually, it doesn't seem at all like easy question because, I believe that maybe it does come up as an easy question, but when you have to actually answer the question, it's like, okay, which values are like my values? What do I really value?
Exactly.
So I would say, but before we go into all that, tell me, how did you come up with this idea? Tell me a little bit about yourself and all the work you do, actually.
I am basically a recovering attorney or lawyer. I was a lawyer many years ago. I was a labor and employment lawyer when I married a lawyer who was no longer a lawyer as well. And I've been married for 30 years, and we have 3 daughters. They're somewhat grown, or they are grown. I have one that's 27, and she's a writer. She's a fiction writer. Just got an agent.
Amazing.
She has a day job. She works writes for Net-a-Porter as a copywriter. And then my middle daughter is 25, so my oldest is 27, and she lives in New York. The oldest lives in London, and she is she trades on the trading floor for Societe Generale. So she is a interest rate trader. She trades swaps, whatever that actually means. And then my baby is actually living in LA, and she just graduated from University of Pennsylvania in May, and she was working for Hailey Bieber's skincare brand. She's a cancer survivor, and I think has always been interested kind of in the things related to, she lost an eye to cancer. So I think that she's a very strong personality. I think when you're a childhood cancer survivor, you're either very withdrawn or you have a lot of, kind of portray a lot of strength. And she portrays a lot of strength. And I think that she's always been interested in beauty products and hair and this and that. And part of it's, I think, because maybe to contour around what she thinks is so obvious to people, when really it's not that obvious. She has a beautiful prosthetic eye. So she now then is kind of transitioning to work for really more of looks like a medical grade type of skin treatment for the face. Oh. So anyways, those are my girls, and they're part of the motivation. My daughter's cancer, my husband's job on Wall Street, watching the rise and fall and crash of different years, different times. Some of my own sufferings. I decided to go back to school at 50 to get a master's in organizational psychology. I was an employment lawyer, so I was always working on the acrimony on the other side, when the problems had already happened, when the employee had been harassed, been discriminated against. There was some issue that now we had to be settling this via the court or law. And I really was always more interested on the other side, the well-being side. Why are people not happy in the workplace? Why are people not happy to begin with? And then I really lived in the arm sleeve of my husband's industry for a long time, when he merged into being a hedge fund manager and from being a lawyer. And I saw so many people with so much money that were so miserable. And I guess that really stuck with me, because I felt like I went back to that universal question: is, do we have to suffer in order to live? And funny that you're Serbian, because I kind of have a lot of these discussions with my Serbian friends, because I think that people who come from maybe war-torn countries and have an upbringing where they understand that they might have to go get their water and walk a mile because electricity is out or the water's not running or what have you. They're living amidst those basic values. And so I think that they tend to sometimes appreciate some of those smaller things in life that many of us forget. Of course, it's easy to forget once you aren't facing those things. But for me, I really wanted to find or create a vehicle for happiness. I really wanted to find a way for people where they could work in the area of positive psychology and not necessarily choose medicine or have to spend all their time speaking about the past and their past sufferings. I think that's very important. I had an older daughter that went to some trauma therapy, EMDR, and it was amazing. And I think you have to visit kind of the trauma and then you work through it. You know it. You work in psychology and in counseling. But I really wanted to create something about movement forward. I've really focused on what's called acceptance and commitment therapy when I was doing my master's, and I did a dissertation with Wall Street bankers and traders on values. Because if you look at the ACT model is a 6-pronged, it's a hexagon. It's complicated. All these mindfulness models are quite complicated. But the most important 2 aspects of it, or maybe 3 aspects, are the mindfulness aspect. So you need to be present and you need to open up, and then you need to do what matters. And one of my professors was one of the first people, or may have been the first person, to take ACT from the medical community and put it into the workplace. And so he has published a couple books about ACT, and it's in the workplace. It's called Acceptance and Commitment Training. And I just was really moved by that. And we decided with the help of the professor I worked with that why don't I just look at 2 quadrants of ACT? Why don't I just look at the 2 quadrants in ACT that I think are the most active parts are basically values, what are my values, deciding what those values are, and then creating committed actions in furtherance of those values. While doing that, in order to create those values, you really have to be present. I found that
that's what I wanted to ask actually. How do we acknowledge which values are ours, and how do we then live by them?
That's the hard part. And I think that's why I wanted to create this kind of almost like your own internal coaching tool. I think the only way we can acknowledge values is through prioritization process. And we prioritize values because any kind of prioritization is the first step to behavioral change. They know that it's almost like making lists, things to do, ways to keep organized, setting New Year's resolutions, setting your goals. But the problem with that is like New Year's. People are like, oh, I'm going to lose 5 kilos and I'm going to read a book, read every night before I go to bed. And I'm going to take this course on coding that I really need because it would help out with business. And then, it starts and maybe you do a couple things and it lasts a couple weeks. And the problem is that they fall to the wayside. But because when goals aren't underpinned by what we truly value, then it's hard for us to reach any kind of actual kind of end state, actually to get there. So really the first step in my model is the prioritization of personal values. And that is basically done through a removal process. And I ask people to remove, oftentimes I used to use cards. It's like this little box I have right here. And I used to be able to take people through my model, like the training. It'd be, just over an hour. Maybe sometimes longer because when you have people kind of in person, there's a lot more chatter among the people and they'd have their laptops with them to do. But first of all, actually, they didn't have their laptops. They just had the box. So they could actually complete the process with physically prioritizing cards. And then I have sorting cards that they could put back into their box. And then they actually went through that value Blackrock exercise that you did, the unconscious bias exercise, and they would put them behind a sorting card. So it was all done like this. I wanted to be able to get their data before they left, run it through the Excel, the maths, and then figure out what was going on. To be fair, like I said, I'm a lawyer, and we talked a little bit before the podcast began. I think that, like I say, I always tell people that I think I've been really creating this model for 30 years. I think I had to go through my own kind of sufferings and pains, and psychology was always at the root of what I loved. I majored in psychology and political science, and then really thought I would get my PhD in clinical psychology, but got pulled more to the political science angle and ended up going to law school. And I thought, I'll do help domestically abused women and children. I'll work as a district attorney, or I'll work as, and then what happens is you have a lot of debt, I have student loan debt, and then you sell out to the big law firm and you're working on the other side for the big companies and whatnot. So I think that. But
I guess with this model, like you came back to that, I guess your values, something you had lost. Yeah,
I did. It's something that I've lost. I did come back to my model. I actually proposed it to the lawyers in the law firm after I had my first baby. I said, I want to come back as a lawyer. I really want to come back as a liaison between your young associates and your management committee, because I think there's a real disconnect. And I think there's a lot of pain and suffering, too many hours of work. Some of them being harassed. I said, there's a lot of unhappiness. And I think that there needs to be like a translator in between. And lo and behold, 30 years later, that's really just the birth, or actually the growth, of organizational psychology. So
yeah. That's actually amazing. But as you said, it's like a 30 years work, basically. And I guess it's something that's developing and progressing, and it's going to be a work that will take more years and just becoming better and better.
I agree. It's exactly true.
Yeah. But what would you say that are some of the questions people should ask themselves in order to discover their personal values?
My model takes them through that in order for them to help them find their personal values, really isolate what's missing, what they have, what's being blocked, like I said earlier. But if I was just going to speak to somebody who didn't want to go through any kind of official training process of values clarification or whatnot, or prioritization, really, I always ask people, and this is what I found asking a lot of like bankers and traders when I sat at these long dinners, and they had healthy children and wonderful spouses or partners, and they still seem miserable. And I would always ask them, well, what did you do when you were young? Like, what would you do when you were 10 years old? I mean, that was just a question I asked. I didn't realize. I said, there must have been something. I mean, did you ride your bike? Did you climb mountains? Did you go for a hike? Did you go to your synagogue, your church? I mean, there must be something that you used to do that you've now forgotten. And that's been kind of the whole bread and butter of what my model is really finding people's lost or forgotten values. So that's really the beginning, is really starting to ask yourself those internal questions. It's hard just to say what is important to me and then to list them. You have to actually have a method or a mechanism to get there. But if you aren't going to do my method, then I think the best thing to do is to start to reflect upon those things. I mean, I read a great book by Mo Gaudeau called Solve for Happy. And he was one of an early, I think he's with Google X now, but he was early at Google, and it was, practically, I don't know, a multi-millionaire before the age of 30, and he had everything. And, but as he had gained more possessions and more money, his life basically started to fall apart. He ended up getting a divorce. He said by his fifth Lamborghini, it gave him 10 seconds of joy when he started the engine and drove for that first minute or so. But then he lost a son in a routine appendectomy. His son was only 21 years old, and his life was crushed. He didn't know where to go. He was suffering so much. The first thing he thought of when he woke up, cried most of the day, and then couldn't sleep at night. And so he's like, okay, I'm a computer scientist. The only way I can create something to make me feel better is I have to solve for happy. So he came up with a formula for happiness. And it really, what he talked about when I listened to one of his podcasts and reading his book, was just about getting back to those things before my life became cluttered with so many other things. What were those just essential things that really drove me, that really serves that catalyst? Steve Jobs' famous graduation speech is another thing that really moves a lot of people. He talks to the students about being hungry, being pursuing, that road that's less traveled, and really, doing what you believe in. He dropped out of college and then just audited classes to see, because he was wasting his adoptive parents' money. They promised his birth mother, who was getting her PhD and just wasn't ready to have a child, that they would send her to college. But they were farmers, and they spent their life savings to send her to college. And then what happened? He dropped out of school because he was sad. He was wasting their money. But then he actually pursued things that became the basis for the Apple computer, especially like the calligraphy aspect of it and that real artsy, creative side to it. So I think that he talks about, after his cancer diagnosis, that and the idea of suffering and losing his job at Apple, being fired by his own board of directors, that you have to be stripped of everything sometimes in your life to really then get that whole rebirth of a recreation, to really find those things that move you and make things happen. And I don't want people to have to be destroyed. I don't want them to have to hit rock bottom or have to have 10 years of counseling to figure out what's making them happy. And I don't want to give my daughters, steer them towards medication right away if they're suffering bouts of depression. Those are all very important things that we need in this world and have been very helpful. But I really want people to be able to look inside and to be present and say, and in my training session, you did it yourself. It's not easy. it's timed and you're forced to like make some gut decisions. And how do you choose between love and kindness or compassion? But that's what happens when you prioritize things and you're forced to remove things. You're able to focus on those very specific things. No human can actually have any less than 5 or more than 10 values at any one time in their life. So that's...
Yeah, but now while listening to you, I was just thinking about some people who would say to this, okay, there are some people who would say, oh, that sounds amazing. I think this would help me a lot and so on. But there is this other kind of people who would say, well, I don't have time for that. I have to, I don't know, find the money to support the family. I have to pay the bills and so on. So I really can't just think about my values and whether I should follow my dreams or something like that. How do you comment on that?
I have a lot of people say that to me because how I comment on that is I wanted to build a sophisticated and like model that people like that couldn't gain. I usually tell them, okay, well, you take time out for, to go to the gym. Possibly you take time out to maybe have drinks at the bar or at the pub with your friends, and you take time out for all of these things. But if you can't take any time in order to, find your own happiness, then what are you doing here? Why are we here? It's like, I usually ask them to think about, if they're younger, if they're before age 40, I usually ask them to say, okay, well, if you don't really think it's important, think about what you'd want your best friend to say about you in a 40th birthday speech. Or think about even on the day of, if they're a little bit older, which is, it's somewhat morbid, but even on the day of your death, think about how you want to be remembered. What do you want people to say about you? That, that you worked 10,000 hours a week and you barely saw your children, but you made a lot of money or what have you. It's really developing that, what the kind of that presence or that character that you're, echoing out to the world. And also, when you're developing that, it's giving you kind of that inner strength. There's a lot of pushing of those people. And that's why I'm kind of right now conducting this free trial. And I've really pushed a lot of these types because selling the model is not easy. First of all, it's a new model, and there's millions of other psychological models, not millions, but there's the standard ones that they use in the workplace. So it's really like pushing a boulder up the largest mountain. However, if I can get them to do the training and I give it to them for free, they're usually always floored by because they're telling me that you're giving me, and you're giving the model this information. Now it's just being interpreted, and it's basically telling you back. It's telling you those things that you don't want to think about. Especially when we're talking about those unconscious biases and those little behaviors that are probably, really screwing up your marriage, maybe your workplace because you're not treating your coworkers correctly. You're probably maybe not even making enough money or prosperity because those values are being blocked because some other things that you're doing in the opposing zone. I mean, it's really the best thing I have to do is those types, the jaded types, that's not for me, it's never going to work. Those have been the ones that have had, I feel, the most transformative reactions to my model, which is somewhat interesting.
That is amazing. So the point is actually for companies or like corporates or whichever place you wanna present your model to actually try it and then see how it can benefit them. Even though it sounds like, as you said in the beginning, so easy when we just name it, like values, like, oh, okay, but it's actually, as you said, like I've tried it, so we're going to talk about it later. And I know how, maybe simple it sounded, but then when I actually should have like answered the question, it was like, okay, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Exactly. Some people read the definitions of the values and other people don't. It's funny. You see some people do it really, really, really quickly. And then I see other people have to use the timer for more time, because I think as you deliberate more, it actually gets more difficult. It's sometimes like taking a multiple choice exam and kind of going with that gut feeling. And I always tell people the whole idea of Revaluate 180 is when I'm asking you to prioritize those values that you're removing. If they are something that's central to your life, they're coming back. The model's going to find them. Okay. But we have to figure out why they're not central. And once we figure out why they're not central and why those behaviors aren't being activated in your life that are supported by those hidden values, those lost, forgotten ones, then we can really see what's going on, like I said, in the heart and mind of people.
Yeah. Your focus is primarily, as far as I understand, corporate setting, right?
Well, I started my focus there because I went to school for organizational psychology, and It is, and I think it's a great way to it's a great focus in which to take the model, because I think it's a great way to hire people. Do they have the
Yeah.
similar values, the ethos of my company? It's a great way to see where team members sit with their values, and if they're willing to share it with each other, are they even sitting in the right position on the team? Maybe the team would be more effective if this individual is more on the marketing side and really out there speaking to the clients and the stakeholders. So it's great, and it's great at the C-suite level, because we have these mission and vision statements that are thrown around all the biggest companies in the world, the smallest companies. And no one, you might read it once, but no one's really living the mission and the vision. But if we can create a value blueprint with the C-suite and actually take the model, and they can do it individually, and then we can create a heat map to see where they have commonalities, where they have differences, or them even just do the activity together, we can create this blueprint, and then the leaders can actually then walk their talk, right? Because if leaders are saying, be on time to work, be early for work, be there, be ready, be this, be that. And then they show up with their Starbucks to half an hour late to a call, or they're not prepared for a meeting. I mean, those aren't matching behaviors to words. So my model in the workplace is kind of almost becomes like that common theme, the DNA that kind of runs throughout the entire organization. So it's a great place in which to administer. And really, built it for the workplace because at a first level, I built it for well-being, because happy employees produce 13% more in the workplace than their unhappy counterparts. And I'm not talking about, oh yeah, joy coming into work doing cartwheels. That's not what happiness means. It's those employees that, have meaning and purpose in their work. So even if they hate their job, they've spent time with their family. They've engaged in a hobby that they're really interested in. They read that book that they've put down a long time ago, and they come to work happier. So if you come to work, you see them. You see them just going to your local Starbucks, or going to your cafe, or going to a nice restaurant. You can see that waiter or waitress or the staff that really are coming to work in a state of better well-being. And of course, they're going to produce more. And guess what? Happiness is also contagious. So if you're around a bunch of people who hate their jobs and everyone's complaining about this one and that one, I mean, that's the worst contagion, because then that's misery. Yeah. That's terrible for an organization. So, but if people come in and you can create happy leaders even, then wow, what a great place you could create. And also, even a better part about being in the workplace is with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Values don't discriminate. Values unite. Values are not separated by race, color, gender, sexuality. It's something that we all have. They rise above. They transcend all of this. So to me, I feel like, especially in America, we are spending so much time arguing about so many individualized groups that we forgot what it means to really come together, and what are those things that hold us together. And those things that hold us together are a unification of values. So I really think that's why it was a good place. But the more and more I do this, I've had some potential investors tell me that this was zeitgeist, that this is of this moment, and that you shouldn't be just in corporations. This should be something you should launch as an app, so people can, maybe like in the Calm and Headspace area, because it's those spaces are amazing. People love them, and they're doing those, their mindfulness space. But what the difference between my models and a lot of what those do is I'm tracking behavioral change. I'm saying, you sit here right now with your values. All of these values are being blocked. So you're sitting in this zone, and that's great. You're spending a lot of time there, but let's try to make some movement. That's why it's Revaluate 180. Let's take a 180 of your atlas and start to move towards change. And as we move towards behavioral change, we'll start to feel that inner meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it could be very beneficial outside of just corporative setting. But talking about corporative setting specifically, so you mentioned that basically one of the factors or areas that would need possibly an improvement would be well-being, right, of the employees. Is there anything else you would maybe highlight?
Oh, sure. I think that well-being is a great place to start, but I think for employee development and leadership is really a great place to really where the model is going to be used to its fullest, because there we can then unpack those unconscious bias value blockers they chose, and we can really see their blind spots, and we can see what those little mistakes they're making every day, those unconscious things that they're doing that are really, really preventing them from reaching better results. So I think in the leadership space, that's amazing. And then we actually have actionable things to work on. the last P of Evaluate 180, after we figure out, you prioritize, then you practice, where you figure out what's being blocked, and we see what you're doing well, or maybe what you're overdoing or underdoing. We have to get to, let's perpetuate. So when you can work with those leaders on matching the behaviors to the actions, that's where that's a metamorphosis of change. That's really what we can see. Once again, that can be even tied into kind of their goals for their work year and what the greater organization wants them to get done. We can actually underpin our model right into the existing strategies that an organization is using. Because once you have
Yeah.
those goals underpinned by the values that they've isolated, it really will create better movement forward. That's what I think. And also, like I said already, at the top, even in the top space of an organization, in the C-suite, because I really think that you'd be hard pressed to sit down with a group of C-suite members who probably really have ever said they've spoken about what their values are. There are some. I mean, another place where it really works well is change management. So you come in and you're working for an organization, and the ethos of the organization is a certain way, and you're used to it and you understand it. And then there's been a buyout. Change management is a big thing in the organizational psychology world. That's basically when you're working for an existing organization and you are either merging with another large organization, or maybe the company's been bought. The employees are the ones that are kind of almost suffer at this change, because they have nothing to do with it. They don't know why this is happening, the intricacies of it, how they're going to, merge the companies. That's when value unification could be really amazing, and when a model could really take place. They could take existing employees with new employees, and they could do some values work when they're forming new teams. Even in the severance space, I've spoken with one of my actually most major client. It's one of the largest U.S. insurance companies. And we've spoken about using it even in the severance space. Like when people are, the economy's suffering. I mean, banks, I think Citibank announced they're laying off 20,000 employees. I mean, Spotify, 16,000. I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to be left without jobs. And I think that this model could even be given to them before they do outboard. A lot of companies offer severance, which is money and benefits, and then outboarding, a little bit of counseling, but it's usually just career counseling. Like, this is what you should be doing, what you could be doing, but it's really not giving them it's not changing their self-esteem. I mean, we could give them an immediate boost as a gift on the way out the door of, you really are valuable. You're important. Just because this job didn't work out. I mean, these are some of the areas that you can improve on, some of your blind spots, but look at the things that really matter to you. And maybe we can even start feeding some of those employees that have been made redundant back into a company, so we can create this kind of life cycle of keeping some of those employees.
Okay, so considering everything you just said, how would you compare small business versus big corporate businesses? Like, is one better than the other?
I don't think one is better than the other. I think one is easier to attack than the other. I think if you have a small business, you have like a private equity firm, or you have a small startup, and they have the money to spend on this kind of work, which I think is actually they should allocate some money to, because if you are forming a small company, I mean, values are at the core. I mean, I've had so many CEOs and managers tell me, "Wow, when people come into the workplace, they all have amazing resumes by the time you get down to the last 5 candidates. They've all had similar experience, similar training, similar universities. And I can give them these very intricate cognitive ability tests or personality tests, which are not linked to performance at all. So it's crazy that the world has just grabbed onto those personality tests for the last, I don't know how many years it's been, over 50 for sure. It's that final test. Does this employee share some of the core 8 values of our company? Does this employee have, do they have those habits or behaviors in their life that could really, be dysfunctional into our company? Or if they have some of these behaviors, is it ones that we can easily work with and get around because the values that they chose are just really suit well for a particular job? I think it's probably easier in a smaller company at first, but I think that you can, well, not easier, because you can just as easy go in a large company, like I said, and start in the well-being space. You start there, you give it to everybody. Everyone gets this model to be happier. Kind of we're selling happiness to the well-being world of inside the corporations. And once you're in there, then you can start to build and work with the teams and work with the organization. So I don't necessarily think one is easier or more difficult than the other. I think that it'll be a different process for how we work our way into the organization itself.
Yeah, so the experience of the employee can be positive in this context, no matter like if we're talking about corporate setting or just some small business, like
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think in a small business, it can be very impactful because if have a small business, that means you're going to be hiring a lot more in the future. And if you can really prioritize what's important to you and then build a company that's built upon that end result, which is if it's an end result doesn't resonate with your values, I don't think you'll have a very good end result because
exactly.
value driven teams produce more. They just know that. I mean, so
Yeah.
I think that it's just essential really in people. And it's something that everyone talks about. Every CEO talks about, and every book you read, if you read self-help books or organizational self-help books, even if they're talking about something completely different and they're talking about resilience or, I don't know, burnout or disengagement or whatever it might be, we circle right back to what's most important, values. But there's no tool, like
Yeah.
workable tool. They can coaches talk about values, counselors talk about, talk about values. It's part of things, but it's not really necessarily. It's just part and parcel of something. This is truly just a value-based tool, which I think is something that is just necessary right now.
Yeah, there is definitely something missing, and as you said, like there is a lot of CEOs, a lot of big corporate people talking about all this well-being and like setting up the meditation or relaxation rooms,
Exactly.
like in the
Exactly.
companies.
And that I have
Yeah,
CEOs even say that to me. Well, why do I want to use your model? I already have like meditation. I have Buddhist monks that
yeah,
come in. I have a gym. And I'm always like, and I say to them every time, I'm like, that's great. That's amazing that you have those things. But the thing is people don't know what one to choose if they don't know what they value. I mean, what works for one, like running on the treadmill might work for you. And, skydiving might work for someone else. And maybe they're going to want a half a day off extra each month to pursue that value. So it's
yeah,
great to have all those things. But if you really haven't determined what your employees want or what they need or what they value, then they don't use them. Or there are select few people use them. And I think when it comes to like the meditation and the yoga, I think, gosh, those are amazing things. But like I said before, a lot of people can't meditate. It's a difficult thing for them to do. It makes them nervous. So they get anxious sitting there, be in their quiet moments. But it's so important to be mindful and meditative. But you can be mindful and meditative when you do value prioritization and you take that deep dive look at yourself. So that's what I usually say to them. And they're usually like, not a bad answer. And they also ask me, well, I don't want to do this because then all my employees are going to leave their jobs and they're going to hate their jobs because they're going to realize how unhappy they are. And I said, no, it's precisely the opposite. You're bringing them happiness. You're giving them happiness. You're not saying
exactly.
these are all the reasons why you're unhappy. I'm going to leave. No, you're giving them a gift. And when you give them a gift and you show them that you care about them, that since the dawn of hybrid work, we can no longer treat just the employee who's at work. We have to entreat the entire person. Jane Fraser from Citibank has said that, and throughout the pandemic, she's like, what we've realized is that we have to treat the whole person. So well-being is about my work life and my home life. And we can't separate when you're rolling on a bed and just throwing on a jacket to pretend like you've showered and you've dressed, you're taking
Yeah.
yourself with you. Your home is right there. Your bed might be right behind you. So it's time to look at the whole person. How can the whole person's life be changed in a positive way so they're a better employee?
Exactly. That's amazing, really. And talking about being a good or being perceived as a good employee, which factors do you think play
Well, if
a
I'm going to
great
if
role?
I'm going to talk about values in my model, I was thinking about that when you asked me that. And I think that for a good employee, I think that before you begin a job, typically there's pre-assessment employment tests. And if you think about those pre-employment assessment tests, it's usually, now it's an interview. If you get to the interview, before the interview, it's usually a knowledge and skills based test. It might be a veracity test, which is an honesty test. They might even, sprinkle some personality assessments in early. And then there you have it. And then they're choosing these employees based upon a lot of these things, or really oftentimes choosing the employees based on one of like if they like them or not. Unfortunately, as humans, as much as we want to be unbiased and subjective, typically in an interview space, if you can get that interviewer to like you and your resume is very similar to the others, you're probably going to secure that job. So I think what an employer really looks for or should be looking for is honest employees, honest and loyal, a sense of responsibility. I think that there has to be skills because that's where the knowledge and skill-based test comes in. I think you want to have someone who has some initiative. And if you have an initiative, that means, maybe you have some excitement and you have some curiosity and creativity. It doesn't have to be creative in the way of I'm going to bake cookies or draw a picture, but creative ways at the workspace or or things you can create to make it a better workplace or make a product better or what have you, if you're an engineer or a product designer. And I probably think challenge. I think challenge falls into like a good leader as well. But challenge, I think if an employee is coming to the office and isn't challenged by what they're doing, and there isn't some part of the job that keeps them interested, then I think they're not probably going to be a great person to hire. So I think those are some great
I
values.
completely agree with you, but like now it just reminded me while we were talking all that how a lot of job postings are all about 10 plus years of experience, and people
Yes.
are just like being okay, like I'm not born with experience. Is really that many years of experience, are they really more important than everything
No.
else that you just named?
No, I don't think so. I think it goes back to a lot of what Steve Jobs has said. I think if you have the tenacity and you want a challenge and you have enough of the skills, or if you don't have enough of the skills, you're just confident in your own intellect and your ability to learn quickly, and just it's a lot of like sales puffing, which is a good thing, is if there's confidence behind it. I mean, for example, my youngest daughter is a good example. I was talking to you about the new kind of, she's merging possibly to work more with scientists on a skincare, an after sun skincare, because there's really only aloe out there. And she'd been thinking about this for a long time and wanted to maybe do something herself, but she knew she had to get with some chemists and some scientists. And she just emailed them. And they're hiring her. They're like, one of them's a Nobel Prize winner. She emailed them, sent them a pitch deck that she had prepared a long time ago. They put her on some calls. And I think, yes, I think that's just the standard practice. So I think that you have to be tenacious to somehow get around some of those things. I think that's difficult. I think that because they're putting in kind of, that's what the standard job market looks like, 10 plus years. They, because they think that those years are going to give people wisdom and experience, and that they do. But I do think if it's something that someone's very interested in, it comes down to the person and really just kind of finding a way in the door to get your application in front of someone. I mean, that's not easy. It's a difficult thing.
Definitely.
I mean, networking is probably one of the most difficult things. And I think if you come from, you don't come from a family that's built into these large networks, it becomes even more difficult. So you have to work it that much harder probably to get noticed or to get somebody to notice you. But that does pay off. I mean, that hard work does happen. You know what I mean? I've even seen it with my writer daughter. This is her second or even third novel. And she sent one, early at 22 years old into the slush pits. And, she's like, oh, but can't you and dad help me? And don't you know any, agents or publishers? And I was like, no, actually, I never even meet agents and publishers. I'm a fairly friendly person. I've gone to a lot of dinners and a lot of social things. I never meet them. But even then, it doesn't matter, because this is going to be, you're going to have to hone your talent, and then you will get noticed. You will, Might not be tomorrow, but you will.
Yeah, hard work always pays off, like, and not giving up on whatever your dreams are. And I just wanted to say, like, we did talk a little bit about employees and their like experience, working experience and satisfaction and stuff. But let's talk a little bit about the leaders. What makes one a good leader?
Well, it's great. One of my favorite classes or modules in my master's was authentic leadership and development or something it was called. But it was really about being an authentic leader. And I just found that class so interesting, because being on the arm sleeve of Wall Street for so many years, having worked in a law firm, starting different businesses throughout my life, it's something that you really need to ponder. And authenticity is probably the value that underpins, I think, leaders the best. Are they walking their talk? Do they do what they say what they mean? Those things are so very important. What I did learn in this course is that doesn't mean that you don't have different faces for different environments as a leader. I mean, you might have your boardroom face, and you might have your happy hour with your team face, and you might have, you have to have different kind of personality traits that you exhibit, or different, evoke different values for different sets of circumstances. But I think probably being authentic, I think a good leader is always looking for a challenge. So it has to be leading the force of like, what is challenging? What are we moving forward? Like, what are our goals? And I think humility is of utmost importance. I think some of the reports I write to leaders, when they do the full development report, which is much longer than what you went through, because we really do coaching, and we actually work with them on attaching behaviors to actions, and what I call perpetuate. How do we now perpetuate our value-based living forward? And a lot of the advice I oftentimes end up giving them is to have humble self-confidence. You want to be self-confident, and you want to believe in what you're saying, but you need to do it with humility, because humility is the best skill you can even teach your child. Like, you treat the doorman or the valet or the guy at Starbucks or the janitor, the cleaner, the same way you're going to treat the president of the company. It's just how you treat people the way you want to be treated. And that should be in a humble fashion. We're all still human, whether we're a movie star or, an ice skater or a psychologist having podcasts on the side. Yeah. So humility, and I'd say encouragement and
That's
fairness.
something that people should definitely be reminded, or remind themselves once in a while, because I think with this crazy very fast life today, we forget that. We really tend to forget it.
Yeah, there's a country song, when I'm living in Europe, you don't hear country as much. So when I come back, you kind of do. And it's a song, and it's called "Humble and Kind," and I think it's by Kenny Chesney. But anyway, it's all about really those are such important two values, and that's really encouragement, fairness, gratitude. Those are things that if a leader has that, thanks for that. That was a really great report. Or if it wasn't very good, have a constructive conversation. That was good. You did this well. You always lead with, I think I try to teach some of the young people that I work with or work with me on my team that even when you're working with outside vendors, lead with what you were happy with. Don't start with this is wrong, I don't like this. You really do this well. I like the way you interact with people. I really love the branding things you did for me. But what about this? You know what I mean? It's all in how you approach situations. And I think if a good leader can encourage employees and be fair and treat them with humility, then I think that they're going to probably have a great organization.
Yeah. And we should consider one more thing, which would be a life-work balance. What do you think it's an optimal balance that a person should have, when we consider working hours a day, a week, or a month?
I think that's a difficult one, because I think as value prioritization and value choices are very individual, I think work-life balance is also very individual. I think that if you are finding yourself to be generally unhappy and sad and not in a good place, then you really need to start to examine, am I looking? That's probably where you are ignoring some important values. That balance is not there. I mean, when you're running to the gym at 5 a.m., because that's the only time you can get there, and then by 6 p.m. you're exhausted, you can't even imagine that you have to go home and help your children, if you have any, with homework or have a coherent conversation with your spouse, then you're probably doing something not right with your work-life balance. But that's where the model is great, because there's 4 zones and they encompass really all the parts of human behavior within those 4 zones. You can really see in a work-life balance where something is missing. Even looking at your atlas, I could, even without speaking with you or really knowing you, besides a brief conversation we had a couple months ago, I can actually see through the mathematics of my model probably some time that you're overspending in certain areas of your life. It might not be, it's just a prediction, and I would have to find out more with speaking with you directly with some qualitative kind of interview, explorative questions. But I think that's very individual. But I think that the trigger might be burnout, disengagement. They really can't distinguish burnout from depression. It's a really difficult thing to do. It might not be a chronic state of depression, but burnout is much like that, when you're just feeling completely depleted. You're tired. Nothing is making you excited anymore. You're getting home from work and maybe you just want to eat and just sit on the sofa and watch the television, whatever it might be. But it's really difficult to distinguish burnout from depression, because they really have overlapping symptoms. Really, the best way to describe it, I read it again, I think maybe it was I listened to it on the BBC. They were talking about burnout. And I think that the woman describing burnout was liking it to almost like an engine running out of petrol or a train running out of steam. That's exactly what you feel like. And I think when you're at that stage of burnout, it's a very dangerous place to be, because I think that's looking at the stress cycle at work. And then that's a time where you really start to say, okay, this is when my model is really necessary. What is missing? And how do I get there? And how do I, because you talk to a lot of leadership experts. I listen to some psychologists talk sometimes. They say that people who aren't burned out and people are loving what they're doing, even if they're getting 4 hours of sleep, that's very possible, because they're sleeping enough for what they're doing, but they fill every bit of their day with something that's interesting. Usually the busiest people are often sometimes the happiest people, because they're just kind of, and they're usually the people who take on the most work or take on something extra. So it's just interesting. So usually I think it's something you're not doing in your life that you have to reactivate. And what will automatically happen is when you start to activate those values that are being underused, you'll start to deactivate some of the ones that you're overusing. And I think that work-life balance will just kind of naturally shift and happen.
That maybe was like partly a cause of burnout symptoms.
For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, when you're not finding joy and you're not feeling that sense of meaning and purpose in your life, when you're just feeling like you're tied to your desk or you're just the rat race. I mean, kind of like I
Yeah.
said, I think the world all over, especially the Americans, are getting to the point with the Europeans we're always ahead. Europeans always work to live, and they always said that Americans live to work. And I think Americans are tired of that now, and they want to I think the millennials and the Gen Zers are kind of changing that narrative, and now they want to work to live. So I think that this model is coming at a good time with respect to just generational changes of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think that that a person can achieve like a good balance in life? So as you said, like some people yeah, tend to be more happier when they like or happier when they are really busy with work. They really know how to figure like things out when they have many things to do. I'm one of them, by the way. Like the more pressure I have, the more work I have, I can actually thrive on it. And
Which I
I
can
think
see,
you're
but
right.
by looking at your atlas when we discuss it, you're really having an openness and personal empowerment. So you're very Western, and that means you kind of seek out novel adventures and excitement, and so you have a curious soul, and you also are driven. You want to
Yeah.
you want to be prosperous and be known for your career, and also be able to earn money, and so that makes sense. So so things kind of light up right away to see
Yeah.
where that balance maybe needs to take place, where the shift
Yeah.
needs to happen. The important thing is what I say in Revaluate 180, and what we've coined is our word is there is no perfect balance. Actually, there's no person that sits 25, 25, 25, 25. And I don't think it's possible, even just the way we live. I mean, because that would just be what a perfect world. I mean, when I was doing values research and looking for quotes and looking for just different research on values, I ran across something that Rosa Parks had said, and she wasn't speaking about values per se, but she talked about saying that that what she wanted for this world was, an, an equality and compassion, and she wanted, she had 4 values, and at the end of creating my model or virtues, I looked back and she listed 4 things, and one was in each of the zones of my model. And I think she was saying that we're never really going to reach that, but we can try. And so what we say at Revalue at 180 is we're trying to create every individual's perfect imbalance. What is my perfect imbalance? How do I get to where I'm not, where that imbalance is good for me, where I feel right, where I'm not having that stomach ache or headaches, and I'm feeling that little pep in my step. I mean, I remember going back to school, and it was a hard thing to do. I mean, I hated law school. I mean, I said I would never go back to school. I love what my law degree gave to me. And even now I love it more because I don't think I could have created this model without it. Just the very linear methodical thinking you have to do and the deep research. So I knew I had to go and get back and get a research-based degree, which mine is. I remember skipping. I felt like I was skipping to the tube, listening to music. My youngest was in her last year of schooling before going off to university. I had one in America, and my other one was doing a master's in Paris. So they were getting to be fully cooked, as my 22-year-old calls it. They never really are as girls. But anyway, they were getting there. But I remember having that feeling of I can't describe it. I guess it was freedom and excitement and just the challenge. And so if I thought about it, and then I had to have a lot of persistence, and I had to go back and I had to study, and it was a lot of work. And I was so afraid to take statistics because I was so far, it's almost, I wasn't going to take the course do the master's because I didn't want to have to do the maths. Had I not done it, I would never have known that I needed a mathematician to be my co-founder who went to boarding A levels with my middle daughter. And she's got a master's in advanced mathematics and statistics. And here I am. So I think, that's how I saw value activation in my own life. It was lost or forgotten. I needed the challenge. I didn't want to be shoulda, coulda, woulda. I didn't want to be 55 that I am right now and say, God, I could have done that and I should have done that. I just did it.
Exactly. I mean, what research says is that the biggest regrets people have in life, in the end of the life, is about the things that they haven't done.
I sent this quote, it's Morgan Freeman,
rather than
to
the
my
ones that
family
they
chat.
did and it didn't
because it's so
succeed.
great.
It's always better to find to try, to risk, to try yourself out in different ways.
This. If you are rejected, accept. If you are unloved, let go. If they choose someone or something over you, move on. Remember that, and every no from someone is a yes to someone better.
Exactly.
And I just feel like that's what this is all about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you have been rejected in your life and you haven't had some success, it's kind of what Steve Jobs says. And you can't connect the dots, he says, until you look backwards. I mean, you can't understand why you had to go through a certain level of suffering and why you were there. So I guess it's really just about helping people understand that they have a tool and they have a way forward, and that it doesn't have to just be when they're suffering. It can be before they start to suffer, before something happens in their life.
Yeah, exactly. For our ending here, I would suggest that we maybe go through my example, because as you mentioned earlier, I'm going to mention it now again. Like for 2 months ago, I tried your model, like at least one part of the training. And I want to share also how I felt while I was doing it. So in the beginning,
That's
it's
great.
like, it's easy. Like you just eliminate those values or blockers that you know don't like that much, or like you have others that you prefer. But then at round 4, or if it was more, I don't remember, I was like, okay,
Round
now
4.
I can't. Now I really don't know what to do.
Now you
So
can't
it
just now
was
you can't
pretty
control.
hard. Yeah, it was pretty hard to prioritize. And I'm actually happy to hear you now explain it as well for the other people to understand better how the model works via my example.
Oh, that's great. And I think we talked a little bit about your example. I think possibly in these feedback reports, the one that you received, I maybe
Yeah.
will give more of a summary page at the front to explain the model again, because it's not like they're going to
Yeah.
remember it. And I think that would maybe help them to understand, or for you to understand, like what comes next. I mean, it's like I said to you, we can talk about it now. Well, why don't we get started? How did you find, let me ask you first, how did you find the process itself, the whole process? Like going
Interesting,
through.
actually. Yeah, very interesting. Your colleague I talked to, like we did have a little chat before, where she was explaining to me what we're gonna go through and so on, and was there to assist me if I needed any help. So I found it interesting. It was also like, because there is a timer, like timing there on the side, it's like a bit okay. At one point, you feel pressured a little bit. Okay, now I have to decide, and I can't decide. And
Yeah,
but it's exciting, and actually I was looking forward to the results and like to see how what the model will say and so on. So it is pretty exciting.
did you resonate with the results of because now recently you've done it with the avatar. What did you think doing it with the avatar versus the human?
I think that would be interesting to try. I don't know how would I feel, because I do like human like contact. So I don't know how would I feel. I would definitely like to try it with an avatar. But about the results themselves, I think that also by you now telling me, showing all of us, what does it mean? I think it's needed for a person to hear also like a feedback.
Okay. So here we have your atlas, which is interesting. And if you see here, you're highly open, right? So a person who's open, you have 33.97%. That's a pretty nice tilt, right? Into openness. So you are attracted to excitement and curiosity, and probably often looking for that next kind of challenge. And probably, I don't know, because like we haven't spoken specifically about this, you obviously are very probably enjoy exciting just personal activities. Maybe you're a person who wants to try something like a new dinner spot, or you want to pick up a new sport. Maybe you want to play pickleball and you've never played before, or whatever it is. It seems like you probably have one of those like let's go attitudes. Like, let's do it. I really want to do this.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really great. That you see that right away. And in that zone of openness, you highlighted the words that the values that you kind of prioritize as most important were that's creativity, courage, and freedom. And that kind of defines exactly what we just said. That freedom to do what you want, to pursue what you want, do those things. But you also chose the maverick blocker. Okay. And the maverick blocker, oftentimes, it's it's often, you might have some impulsive actions that, sometimes often can maybe overshadow some of the potential risks, and you don't necessarily always look at the consequences of that. And it says that according to the Maslow's model, that blocker is then how our model works is you're sitting here in regulation and these are your values. And what an individual is always trying to do, after we basically, just to go back a little bit, the first activity you did was just the prioritization process, which we talked about, and it's an elimination process. And that's where we can establish how much time you're telling me you spend in each zone, right? So you told me that you spend probably the most of the time with the values, activating the values in the openness zone, what we just spoke of. Your second most important zone is the personal empowerment zone. That's also where you spend a significant amount of time, and that's in the pursuit of probably career aspirations and prosperity and possibly money. And I have to look back down at some of your results to see if what are the exact ones that stand out. Let me see. In personal empowerment, the values you kind of chose were challenge and independence, which kind of goes with the idea of that being free and choosing what you want to do. Oh. Okay. So, and then it's interesting, but on the east side of your atlas, you are very low in both of those zones. So when I would first look at your prioritized results, not even looking at your value blockers, just analyzing you and getting to know you, because I always need to see the name too. Even now that we're doing this via AI, we're getting these AI generated reports that have completely been trained in our model. So it's based upon all of the past reports we've written, all of the research, all of the rules. And then obviously it still takes a human touch. You go in and then you really kind of massage it and really make it even more personalized. Everyone is personalized because everybody chooses different things and has different values and different blockers. But I would be saying, okay, well, likely because you're so low in regulation and you have the maverick blocker, you probably need a few more guardrails in your life. Maybe you maybe bite off a lot, you know what I mean? More than you can chew sometimes with what you're doing, which is what keeps your life so interesting and exciting. But you likely could institute kind of maybe more, just some more safeguards. When you have the maverick blocker, it actually blocks the specific values of respect, trust, and humility. I'm not sure how that plays out in your life. I can predict. So I think that if it's blocking some of those values, then you're not trusting of yourself? It's likely maybe you're not trusting of other people. And so that's why you kind of push forward and get things done. And maybe it's affecting, some kind of maybe communication or collaboration with others when you're doing that. And I think sometimes I don't think that it necessarily reflects a lack of humility, but I think it reflects maybe to the outside world that if sometimes you're kind of pursuing these things at kind of your own, just not worrying too much about the consequences, that sometimes it could appear to affect your individual kind of humility in a situation. So right there, we can automatically see things that generally you can work at. In the global vision zone, you actually chose 3 blockers. And it's really interesting. This is why I told you have one of those very interesting profiles. When you are tethered to a zone that is one of your lowest zones, it's pretty incredible. So you're telling me with your activities and the choices you made that even though it's one of your lowest rated zones, your third lowest, you're spending a lot of time in there because you're tethered to the values that support those blockers. So shoulder, idealism, and odds. Okay. So shoulder means, you're basically taking on the problems of the world. You're probably with the children in your life and family and friends, you're that person everyone depends on. A lot of it's because you have a natural inclination probably towards psychology. And so you can help them a lot. And so you're kind of burdening everyone's problems. When you're shouldering people's problems, that's really blocking values across the axis and one of your strongest zone, your second strongest zone. So you're really kind of taking away some of your own money and prosperity and kind of it's going at your probably your skillfulness. You're not able to spend enough time in things that really can move your career forward, if that makes sense. And I'm speaking about this much more generally as to not give people your specific, all of your specific things. And then when it comes to regulation, let's see, you chose the forest blocker. Oh, I have the forest blocker too.
Yeah.
So I think that comes to people who have who are finally, and I think it's in your work. Okay, so once again, you're 17.63%. So that seems very low, but that force blocker is probably forcing you into some very regulated tendencies that are probably really good for your life in a lot of ways. I tell people these blockers, what's good makes you bad. It's like almost with your children. Your best qualities you see are their worst. You know, they're really friendly, they're outgoing, but they might be like getting in trouble with the teacher all the time because they're busy chatting in the back of the classroom, right? So in this regulation zone, when you have the forest blocker, you attack details sometimes because you can't let it go because you know that one detail could have ripple effects through the rest of whatever you're working on. And I think that's just, you're really fine-tuned and into like, you narrow in. And I think that's, I mean, for me, for creating this model, for being a lawyer, I think that forest blocker does serve me well. But it's also, blocking things across the atlas in your heaviest zone. And what it's blocking is flexibility and acceptance. So you're probably a little inflexible to maybe some team decisions. And so if we can find strategies that kind of, you still focus on the very, just, the details, but really force yourself to look at the bigger picture of things. I think that those blocked values and openness of flexibility and acceptance will open up, because I don't know about you, but if I am really focused, is that true? Do you focus really heavily on the details that sometimes bog you down with maybe getting
I have the tendency to do that sometimes, definitely, yeah. Yeah, and then I cannot let it go that I definitely want it to be that detail perfect, because in my mind, it's very important. So I do tend to do it sometimes.
Same. I do exactly the same thing. I mean, it's interesting. But like I said, it probably is also one of your best qualities, is because you're not going to miss out on something very important. Like I'm like honing in so deep because I want to make sure that I'm not going to forget something, or I'm not missing something that's hiding in the data or the analytics.
Exactly.
I'm sure. Yeah. So I think that
Yeah.
can be good, but it does make me somewhat less accepting sometimes of other people, because you're kind of probably adamant. Well, no, we haven't really figured this part of this out, and we've got to do that. So I think that it very naturally, when you see the values that it blocks in your life, you can see where those points are of where we have to work on things. So even though like these zones look very heavy, you've prioritized them as being your heaviest, but a lot of the important things in those zones that you've prioritized or that are lost or forgotten aren't being activated at all. So that's why it's really about finding your own perfect imbalance, because when you loosen the grip, because I think in global vision, let's see, did you have? So in one of your lowest zones, and this is why I told you this is so interesting, and we just talked a little bit about it, you have 3 blockers, and it's in global vision. Okay. Global vision is much lower. It's not as low as regulation. So obviously, like I said, you need some kind of guardrails there, maybe some organizational structures that can keep your flexible and exciting and kind of almost fun approach to things alive, but maybe just say, have some loose structure around it. Like, I'm going to, even if it's just a daily kind of, if you're someone that's not as attached to like a daily calendar or something. But in global vision, this is the zone that's the most interesting. And even though the atlas, at first blush, we would tell you in a report to move into global vision, because that's the zone of where you're doing good for others, altruism, that looks like it needs the most. Regulation is the one that looks like it needs the most work, because you're the lowest there. We would tell you to go there. Global vision's interesting because you're low there, but you're also really tethered there, which means you want to, because these behaviors, these unconscious biases of, I think it was shoulder idealism, and here it is, shoulder idealism and odds. Okay. So with those blockers, shoulder idealism and odds, like we talked a little bit about already, that with the shoulder blockers, did you relate to that? Are you the person that everyone goes to? Like your kids are, obviously talking to you, maybe your partner.
Well, most certainly.
That's right.
Definitely.
So, and as much as but you feel a very strong need to attend to those needs, and that's great. That's, like I said, those are beautiful parts of people's imperfect balance, but you're going to have to figure out a way. Okay. If like, I can tell with my oldest daughter, she's just always been the most attached. If she's calling me 65 times and she's not truly in crisis, I say, I have 3 calls, this, that, the other thing. I can talk to you at 4 o'clock. I mean, you can't always do that when your children are younger, but you have to find ways around kind of compartmentalizing some of the things you're shouldering. Odds is interesting. I also have that one. That blocker is tying you to the global vision zone, is because even though you're really personally empowered, you are very cautious because you really take small risk. You make judgments on these areas where it's very unlikely to happen, but you blow it, out of proportion. I'd be someone who's never swims in the sea or the ocean because they think there's going to be a shark attack, where if statistically it's just not true. It'd be very unlikely for them to get bitten or eaten by a shark. Or, I mean, I remember when I was young being worried about like a vending machine falling on top of me if it wasn't like leveled quite right. I mean, it's just having these very small fears. And but when you place a lot of emphasis on those small fears, it can render you paralyzed, right? So if you look at that in the global vision road, the 4 value blockers, you chose all 4. Oh my gosh. So shoulder, idealism, odds, and crowd. So I say it's influencing your perspective, possibly leading you to prioritizing the needs of the collective over individual aspirations. So essentially, even though you're so high in personal empowerment and you're telling me that those prioritized values in that zone are most important to you, you're probably spending most of your daily time in global vision. So this is where I talk about how this is what's great about this model is I can predict what's going on in your life, but until I talk to you and you tell me the story of your life and you tell me what are those fears or what are those things that maybe are holding you back with your odds blocker. Idealism, my husband has that blocker. Those are, you have your ideal view of the world. You think my husband, I think, always believed that you didn't have to do a lot of politicking in the workplace. And it just always bothered him. He didn't want to really be doing a lot of self-promoting. So he really focused more on his work, and he felt like his work should speak for itself. And that's a very kind of utopian view of the world. And I say to people, it's about moderating both your behaviors and your blockers because you still don't want to lose that idealism because that's probably what drives you. But maybe you have to self-promote a little bit more sometimes in the workplace, or maybe you have to figure out a way just to, get your name out there a little bit more so people can see some of the great things you're doing to enrich that prosperity. So it's all about kind of give and take. And that's what it's about with this perfect imbalance. And you chose crowd, and that's another interesting one. I didn't choose that one. But I haven't worked on teams a lot for a long time. I mean, I have a small team, but typically crowd is interesting. So it's not like hive. The hive blocker is when kind of people are just kind of following the crowd. A lot of times you see that with younger people or people who just are tired and they don't feel like arguing with people in the workplace or their family at home, or it's like, whatever. Okay, we'll just go to eat here because even though I really don't feel like having that type of food, I'm going to go with you guys because I just don't feel like dealing with it. Crowd is more like you're working with a bunch of high-level thinkers and you really see a problem. Probably comes down to your odds blocker or even your forest blocker. You really see a problem with that decision, but you fail to speak up at that moment. And then you're left with some type of a decision that you're really not that happy with. And a lot of times those feelings create some resentment, some feelings, some kind of inner anger. So what usually, and they're blocking those important personal empowerment values. They're blocking those things that are most important to you, probably self-care and money and prosperity, because you are not really speaking up maybe at the right times. And also not probably victimizing yourself. And that's what happens in global vision. So I guess the most interesting thing about looking at a landscape like yours is oftentimes people aren't tethered to their lowest zones. They're oftentimes tethered to their highest zones, right? Because they're exaggerating behaviors that they've really found important. So what I found really interesting about people like your value atlas, and it would be so interesting to talk further about it and to go through the interview process, is that you almost you don't even realize how much you're giving to the outside world in global vision. You don't realize just how much time you're activating those values. And really, I mean, you probably are really a wonderful mother and really a wonderful friend and partner because you really are giving a lot to those around you. And I think, but you also go to bed at night. And sometimes if you're like me, because I spend a lot of time in global vision, I do feel sometimes a little bit jaded and a little bit used sometimes. If I was to be honest, I don't want to say that, but not necessarily by your immediate family members, but sometimes by your friends, because, maybe no one's really seeing how you're doing and how are you coping and how are you getting through the day and with all of these things. So I don't know. So essentially speaking, the atlas, the R1, the 180 that you should be moving from probably is more into global vision, into regulation. However, if I speak to you and learn the story of your life, which is what I call the narrative landscape, the second P. So the first P we prioritize, and I see where you're sitting or where you tell me you're sitting. The second P is we're practicing our values, and that's where I learn the story of your life, and I call it the narrative landscape. What are those
that was
mountains?
my next question. What would be the
Yeah.
next step then?
So I only get part of your narrative landscape. I just got to see those blockers. And I get to get a little peek into your soul and to see what you're thinking. But the other part is the qualitative interview, and that's the full developmental process. We haven't done that, so I can't really see the particular examples of your life. You can show me how these things are taking place and how they're playing out. Likely speaking, even though it looks like you need to go more into global vision, you probably could spend more time in regulation. I'm not sure. A person who's highly open, if you really are exercising or activating those values almost too much sometimes, do you find that you need a little more regulation, organization in your daily structure?
I can resonate with the things that you mentioned there, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, and probably you don't notice it because you have that forest blocker. So you're really paying attention to detail. So that's probably balancing that, which is good for you.
Yeah,
You know,
that makes sense.
but I would say that we would likely find in the interview portion that even though global vision is your second lowest zone, you're probably overactivating values in that zone. So really, something we didn't talk about, and what Rogers and Skinner's talk about a lot at the turn of the century, is that values evolve with the changing circumstances. Kind of like I was talking about that authenticity with leaders. I mean, you evolve your values for the changing circumstances of life. And I think it's that disconnect. Rogers said that values really are the most important to how we're activating our behaviors in life, and that whole idea of which I'm sure you've studied a lot of self-actualization, right? And he says it's when we have suffering and we have pain is when the idea of our operative values and our conceived values clash. Our conceived values is really how do we want to activate them in our lives, and how are they being activated, right? And our operative values is really just our flat out behavior. When we're a child, he said, everything before age 2, none of our values are conceived because it's really just like, oh, a hot stove, fight or flight, run away. Oh, that hurt, I felt. Oh, my mom gave me a hug, I feel warm. So our values don't have any judgment. But when language starts to come in, that's when we start to form our unconscious biases, some of the discrimination that we see in the world, because then we're listening to other people's judgments and behaviors. And that's when those difficult conceived activation of our values are taking place. And so I think that you don't even necessarily consciously know that you probably are overactivating a lot of values in global vision. So you probably are going to be not having to move so much into that zone as you are, maybe a little bit more into regulation. And maybe your atlas, when we get to the final stage, which is perpetuate. So we have prioritize, we have practice, where we do the 2 activities of the blocker exercise and an interview when you do the full process. And then we move to perpetuate. And that's great that we know all those things, but if we're not going to perpetuate value change in our life and figure out what values need to be underactivated and what ones we need to activate more that you've told me are important, that you've chosen, and what ones are maybe need to drop off, and maybe we need to pick up those ones that are lost or forgotten. So those lost or forgotten values are a lot of times where we see big behavioral changes in people. Maybe with the forest blocker, when you start to really think, when you're going down one of those paths, well, you know what, and people aren't agreeing with you and they're really finding you frustrating, that maybe you think, maybe I should be a little more broad-minded about this situation. Maybe I'm spending a lot of time on this small detail, and I really could be more accepting of some of the other opinions that are coming at me. Even in your personal relationships, maybe with your partner, or even with your child, when you're, thinking, no, you have to do it this way, or it's not going to get done. That's a forest blocker. Or maybe they're like you. One of your children, they're creative and they're really open-minded, and so it's blocking that for you, or that's a lost or forgotten value for you. So as open as you are, you've lost that idea, somewhat of that idea of broad-mindedness. I don't know this for sure, right? But as I'm talking,
but that's why I guess the next step would be something that will be so good for both of us, you understanding and being able to actually give me some more input
exactly. on coaching and how do you go forward. With particular values. Exactly. Because you might say, nah, I really don't do that. I chose that blocker, but I really don't do that. And we'll see how it plays out in your life. And imagine what we can see 6 months later. I mean, what I'm really working towards is creating an individualized app that obviously a company can get for all of its employees, or just people can buy. And as you start to make these changes in your life, and as your atlas starts to move into a new zone where you're spending more time, you're going to start to feel, as it moves in real time, you're going to start to feel that inner change, that inner meaning and purpose. So it's really, hopefully, it should be remarkable for people's lives.
How not?
I hope
Like,
that was helpful.
for sure, for sure. And now it makes much more sense than when I was just looking at it by myself. So you telling all these things, I can understand it really much more. And I can understand how much it would mean if, we would do the next step and then the next step.
Exactly. And even a debrief. So we offer, if this is like the feedback report, we offer for, companies, or we'll do it eventually on the app, or if people buy us individually. If we offer it individually, right now we're not offered individually. But it might be coming soon, meeting with some potential investors next week. I think that people will begin to understand kind of that model more when they, you know what I mean? When they start to see what are the next steps that I can take. Yeah. But I am going to probably make some changes even to the feedback report, maybe give people a summary of what they experienced so they can maybe follow along a little bit better. And then maybe even at the end, it's kind of give me some good ideas here, Jelena. For the end, I might actually take the third P and say, based upon your predictions, this is my, this is, to summarize it, this is the movements that you could begin to make forward, and give them almost like a little box,
a summary of it, which I think is like what we will learn through the process. Like
I have that in my developmental report, which is the really long process. It's like right now it's like a 30-page thing, and then I have basically takeaways. I call them takeaways at the end of each section. But maybe we'll just do one here. Thank you. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Anyways, I
great.
Really enjoyed this. I hope most of it recorded.
Thank you very much for staying with us until the end and for watching whatever we create and share here on YouTube. Thank you as well for following us and supporting us on our social media channels. I hope that everything Tia shared today with you can be useful and can benefit you in some way. If you think that your friends or other people might need to hear something like this, then I will ask you politely to share it with them. And thank you very much again for supporting us.